Good afternoon. I wanted to talk about some of the advantages of container growing a tree. This is really more or less a continuation from last week's video where I talked about some of the trees that I really would recommend you only grow in containers. This is more about trees that, tropical trees that do really well in containers. So there's a couple of reasons why you would want to grow a tropical in a container. Some of which would be, number one, you're short on space. So my entire yard, the backyard and the front yard, I measured it this afternoon. Total square footage is roughly 1,950 square feet, which translates to about 0.4 or 4% of an acre. So it's not very big, and yet thanks to containers, I mean I've got close to about 200 tropical trees here in my yard alone. So growing things in tropical, when it comes to growing them in tropicals, number one is going to be the growing medium that you are going to pick. Make sure that it is well draining, and knowing that it's tropical, I would recommend you incorporate some sand into your mixture. Sand's going to provide great drainage. When you look at my nursing of the starfruit video, I mean, the Central Valley's clay soil, it just doesn't drain. And with a lot of the tropicals, maybe with the Japoticaba being an exception, any wet feed, they will likely just would rot and die out. So space is a big reason why you would want to containerize a plant. Number two is it allows you a lot of varieties. I mean, in my yard alone, I think I have close to maybe 6 or 7 varieties of wax bamboos. So, I mean, why not? You know, thanks to these containers, I'm able to taste the different varieties of wax bamboos. Another reason why you would want to, and this is the main reason why you would want to container grow a tree, is mobility. In that when it gets cold or when it gets hot, you're able to move the tree around and give it some shelter and protection. Almost all the trees that I have that I'm aware of can be grown in containers. There are some trees that you probably do not want to grow in containers, such as the Duhat or the Java plum right here, Jamun tree. Just because these are so fast growing that there's just, the root systems are going to need a lot more than what the containers can accommodate. Another tree is going to be the Inga tree, ice cream bean tree. Yeah, you do not want to containerize this. I mean, it'd be okay. I mean, I'm not saying that they're going to die or anything. It's just that they're not going to thrive. Same with mulberries and moringas, things that are super fast grower. Those are better off in the ground if at all possible. But otherwise, most of the other tropicals you can container grow. So I wanted to show you this. There's the comparison between container growing versus a tree that's in the ground. So this is a trample canistel, also known as an egg fruit plant. See, it's not so happy looking. If you look at the leaves, it's alive. It's surviving. But when you look at the leaves, it's kind of sad looking, right? Compared to its sibling here, this is also another canistel. In the ground, it is doing phenomenal. I mean, you see some, cold stress, but this is expected. But I mean, this guy's doing great. With a tree being in the ground, I mean, it has just vast resources made available to it, including the Wood Wide Web network and also the mycorrhizal network. So going back to the container growing of the trees, I actually feed these. I perform additional feedings when it comes to containerized trees. In addition to foliar feeding that I do, in addition to your typical watering, and also granular feeding. So basically, with my trees, I granularly feed them 3 times a year: spring, summer, and fall. With foliar feeding, it's generally twice a month. Um, with container grown trees, I also give them an additional feeding of liquid feeding. Being that these are containers, they respond really well to liquid feedings. Whereas if I say liquid feed a tree that's in the ground, yeah, it helps, but it's just going to get washed out somewhere else. So I should emphasize on the drainage factor. I mean, being that these are in a confined space, the roots really have nowhere to go when it's flooded with water. So you do want the water to drain down the bottom and away from the roots. And also, when it comes to watering and feeding containerized trees, you want to be consistent in feeding it and also watering it, because it is relying on you to water and feed it. Unlike the trees that are grown in the ground, I mean, they get water from nearby, and also in my case, neighbors who water their lawn. So it's a benefit for some of you. But I wanted to show you too. Another benefit, I'm not sure if it's a benefit, but another factor when it comes to growing things in containers is you are artificially restricting their growth. So for example, this climbing wattle, in Thai it's known as a chaom. But this climbing wattle has been in a container for the past maybe a year or so. 15-gallon container. It's about 3 years old. Versus this climbing wattle right here in the ground. And yet this one's only 6 months old. So you are artificially restricting their growth just because of the confinements of the roots. So in many ways, if space is an issue, just continue to grow it. It still will produce fruits. It's just not going to give you full potential, but it still will give you fruit. Another tree that is a lot better in the ground, although it can be container grown, is going to be this sad looking guy here for now, because it is cool, is Barbados cherry. I mean, after the first week that I put this guy down, well, after the first month that I put this guy down, I mean, it got massive. Whereas if I left it in a container, it really didn't do anything at all. I mean, it was alive, it was growing, but as soon as it was in the ground, its root system was able to stretch outwards, grab a lot of resources nearby, it just grew. So in addition to the Barbados cherry not being recommended when it comes to growing in a container, it's going to be the banana. The problem with bananas is they are fairly fast grower, and the way they produce is it shoots up pups, which means your container, 15-gallon container, is probably not going to be enough room for it to shoot up pups. So yeah, bananas, they need a lot of spaces in order for it to produce pups. So if you look at some of these containerized trees here, this is a longan. I mean, they're doing great. Same with this tree shampoo here. I mean, this is all containerized. For the most part, most of the containerized plants that I have are either slow growers or they are just extremely cold and heat sensitive. So I wanted to show you the greenhouse that we've got here. And again, this is actually I'll get in here. This is mostly container grown plants. I mean, the mobility factor alone in having to allow me the option of moving these into a shelter environment is a reason why I container grow these. When you look at this longan right here, I mean, they're doing great. So last week I talked about milkberry as being one tree that I would recommend you container growing just due to its strict soil pH requirements. Another one that I would recommend you also, if you are able to, and it depends on the species too, but of growing in containers, is actually going to be the mango. There are certain mangoes that do really well in the Central Valley. Manila comes to mind. But for the most part, mangoes, they are quite sensitive to the clay soil that we've got here in the valley. It would be my recommendation that you grow them in containers. That way you're able to incorporate a lot of sand into the mixture, and hopefully drainage is not an issue. So let me compare the two. Let me see if I can get back here. Oh, this guy right here. This is what I was looking for. So this is ice cream mango. It is about a year old. Well, actually looking at the size of the roots, the trunk, it's roughly about 2 years old. But it is in a container. I wanted to compare the difference between container grown versus the ones that are in the ground. I do have one that's in the ground. It comes, and this is really specific to mango. Specific to mango, it is my recommendation if you are able to just container grow it. There's really no harm compared to this ice cream mango here. They are both the same age, but yet this one gets beaten by the environment, and it's also likely not very happy here in this area. Just it's probably stressing out due to the soil that it's currently in. But I think this guy will be okay. So anyhow, yeah, just there's no harm in growing things in container if you know the plant requirements. Almost all the plants, tropical plants that we have here, can be grown in containers, and you know they do fine. I mean they may not grow to their full potential, but they will give you fruit. So all right, have a good afternoon.